welcome to Combat Photography. I am apprentice Daguerre of the Chroniclers Guild, apprentice to Master Lady Armstrong, and just a lot of people don't know about the Chroniclers Guild. A lot of people don't know about the Chroniclers Guild. So for real life context, I have been taking photos for about 16 years at this point, and I've been working professionally in some capacity for about 12 years. I was able to go to school, get my degree in photojournalism. If you want opinions about whether or not you should get a photography degree, I'll talk about that another time. But yeah, so then I've been working in different capacities from wedding photography to marketing photos, and then I kind of landed here. So just a general thing, general overview of the class, so we all understand what we're looking at. I'm going to talk about what goes into my brain when I'm shooting photos, because there's a lot of this that is kind of luck, right? But there's a lot of knowing how to put yourself in the right position at the right time and teaching yourself what to look for. Also, a lot of this I'm going to try to make pretty accessible to even shooting on your phone in some capacity. It'll scale up as we go. I just wasn't sure where everybody was at, because when you've been doing this for 12 years, there's a whole lot of info. All this to say, there's a lot of stuff that's super subjective. And if I suggest things that don't quite fit your style, feel free to change it around. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, you gotta know the rules to break the rules. I'm all for breaking the rules, but I just want to give some people some basics, because I see a lot of photos from really well-intentioned people that feel like they just kind of stand and point somewhere. And so I had people ask me, well, how do you know how to shoot fighting? And I realized that for the majority of us, we aren't actually fighters. And so you don't know what you're looking for. And so if you're just here having fun and you've never shot sports, how do you even know how to do this thing, right? There's a lot of tips and tricks you can look for, and we're going to go through as much as possible. So hang with me. So I'm going to explain all this stuff. We're going to set up some fights, and then I'll have you guys try to work in a circle around those fights and think about those things in mind. And then if we have questions, we'll go from there, and then we'll try to do in advance more things to think about if we get to that with time. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of luck that goes into this. You kind of just have to set yourself up for success, right? So when I was in school, the first thing that we were taught was to build your image from the background forward. So when I come to a site like this, the first thing that I look for is, okay, if we're a Belagarth medieval combat society, what can I use as my background to make any of this feel more medieval to me? So I'm going to avoid cars as much as I can. Obviously, Philly Creek is more of a Civil War reenactment, so while there are beautiful spots, sometimes I personally will shy away from them. That's absolutely your choice. Other times I will choose to really embrace the event as it is happening in a more documentary style, and that's your choice. Things to think about, right? So let's pretend that we're shooting tournaments later, right? In this spot, there's nothing that screams particularly medieval to me, so usually what I'll do is I'll look for a good background. Were this tractor not here, I would probably shoot with this tree as my background with them in this spot in the middle. Nice clean background. If there's two of them squaring up, I can put the tree between them, and then there's cool elements that we're playing with, right? So think about what you're doing with your background. So then the next thing you're going to think about is, where is your light coming from, and how is that affecting your image? Obviously, fighting is kind of its own moving, breathing thing, and so you can't always control where you're at. Well, you can control where you're at, you can't always control where they're at. So if you're thinking about your background, you can position yourself around the ways that their bodies are moving to create a better image, but also to pay attention where lighting is. So for example, if you were here at Armageddon, we had the Vanguard of Silas host the Fizzball tournament. And I knew that at the time of day where the sun was coming down over their camp, if I positioned myself here on the fighting field towards the trees, that the light was going to come through all of the little droplets of beer that were being exploded by baseball bats, right? And there was some photographer sitting over here, and I said, hey, come here real quick. This is real cool. So if you get to a site and you want to look for it, things to think about is, so right now our sun's right here. I can either shoot this direction and get a whole lot of really harsh lighting on their face. It's going to be really vibrant colors. If you want to shoot more like snappy and punchy, think about shooting with your back to this way with more light on your face, right? I tend to approach my photos a little bit more as portraits. I came up shooting band photography, and when I would enter a scene, I would always think to myself, how can I make a photo for every person in this band that they would want as their MySpace profile picture? And so when I look at a fighting field, I think of that too. How can I represent this person in a way that makes them feel good about themselves, brings them dignity? And I think about that even as I'm fighting. So all of that to say, my lighting, I tend to shoot, like if this was me right now and I just shoot here, they're there. I'm probably going to risk my background being way too bright and shooting with their faces a little bit more exposed on the shadow side. This is really harsh out here, so obviously just kind of depends on where they're moving. As the day goes on, the sun is going to come behind this tree, and like all of these little spots on the ground are going to move over here, and then I'm going to be able to get cool light poking through the trees if they're fighting right here and I'm standing here, right? So like last night when we had Carol's knighting, the sun is coming down about here, and it gives this cool effect across the whole barn. I know that's a lot to think about, but yes, these are all the things going on in my head at the same time. Yes. I am in the middle of a class right now. I cannot. I am so sorry. Thank you. Oh, another example of lighting real quick. When we were at Equinox down at Monte Bell, they had a crossbow tournament. And so what I did was, if you are everybody watching the tournament with your sun, or sitting basically as you are right now with the sun coming down behind you, the opponents would square off here, right? So I had decided to sit across from everybody so I could get reactions and laughing and oohs and ahs. But then the one fighter was standing here, had their back to this tree. So I have all this beautiful filtered light coming through and lens flares. There's this guy with like a bandana and a cowboy hat, and it was great. And then over here, there was no tree and the sun was super harsh. So then I could get them like with these crossbows squaring up, like with the bright blue sky behind them and like the real harsh light, and knowing how to manipulate my settings, I could flip back and forth and get both of these styles at the same time. So things to think about when you're taking your pictures, even with phones, but this does scale up, obviously. So now that we figured out what we're doing, how do we actually shoot this goddamn game? So, okay, like I said, can I grab you two real quick? Sure. These are my fighters, RM and Kaled. They're my sweethearts, and I love them. So real quick, while they're grabbing their stuff, I will say that Belagarth, generally speaking, especially in tourney settings or smaller groups of fighters, there's a lot of pausing. There's a lot of waiting and going real quick and resetting, and going real quick and resetting. And so these do scale up on the field, but it just kind of depends. I picked a handful of fighters with different things to think about as they fight for you guys. For example, Kaled here is a natural lefty and has one hell of a reach. Excuse me. One of the other fighters who's coming is Jareth, who is this quick, speedy little guy. He's all over the place. And so the more that you are in... Hey, thank you. The more that you are around this community and pay attention and learn to look for these things, the more that this can impact the way that you are shooting and what to think about while you're on the field. And that's up to you what level of detail you want to play that at. I kind of play this game like a Rolodex. Okay, so if these are my two fighters, I'm going to have them square off real quick. Square off kind of casually, just hold it like that. I know that the first thing I want to do is get that MySpace profile picture, right? And so you got two options. If Kim is my fighter right here, while they're waiting, while they're looking at arm, picking off the spot, you can come in nice and tight and get a waist-up shot. I call this the grandma shot because everybody's grandma wants to see that photo. That gentleman literally asked me to take a photo with his grandma earlier. So, same thing with Aram. I can look at him right now. I can see that he's got this shield. He's got this down stick. This is too much stuff down here. It's too much black. There's nothing fun. I don't want to look at that. Square off a hair again. But I can frame up off this shield, right? He's got blue eyes. I can focus on that. That's really going to pop. Caleb has this hood to look at. We'll get into that stuff later. But yeah, get one good photo of their face before they even swing at each other when all their stuff still looks good, right? So like I said, you really want to anticipate your action while you're doing this because they are going to move pretty quickly. So one thing to think about is if you have a camera that allows you to shoot in burst mode, a bunch of pictures at once, honestly, like this is where the luck comes in. You kind of set yourself up for a bunch of frames at once and hope that you get something good. Sometimes you can get some weapons in a cool place, and that's where the luck plays in. But if you set yourself up for success, find a good spot, your success rate gets a lot higher, and then you have my problem where there's too many photos to edit. Go ahead and do a couple blows, and I'll yell pause. Okay, pause real quick. Thank you. So as they were fighting, go ahead. Okay, so as they were fighting, they started drifting this way, right? So if I'm shooting this fight, especially in a small group like this where I don't have to be aware of the field, I can start moving with them. As I'm moving with them, I'm watching that my light is changing. So if I need to change any settings on my camera, I'm watching that there are cars coming behind them, and I got to keep that medieval experience, right? So can I work around them? Do I wait? Is it even worth the shot for me? Like, I like these guys, so I'm going to shoot their fight more. If I'm not going to like that car in the background, that's up to you. So also you can see now we have Caleb down on her knees. So one thing that you can think about that's cool as you're fighting is how to position fighters against each other. So now that they're down here, I can come around behind. And so like right now, especially with their knee up like this is basically a picture frame for where he's standing. And so this is like golden for me, especially with this light coming in. He's got this harsh highlight on the side of his face. And this is a real good shot. And I just had to look for it. They're just fighting. They didn't entirely set all that up for me, right? So basically what you're going to want to do is just keep reassessing as they're going. So go ahead and Jareth, can I grab you for one real quick? One thing I forgot to talk about is composition. So two things of composition you're going to want to think about real quick. Okay, you can't quite see the lines on here, but imagine that there are two vertical lines splitting this into thirds and two lines here like you're splitting this into thirds. These are really fun lines to play with. I hope you guys can see anything that I'm doing here. So right now I have Jareth standing on this line and I have Caleb standing on this line. And so this is pretty interesting. So pretend like you guys are going to fight, square off against each other. So right now, that's real nice and pleasing. I got some space between them. I got this cool shadow down here I can look at, thinking about lighting. And I can also drop down here. That gets more interesting. I can tilt up and make them look really small under the sky. I can make them look really big like this. So things to think about is that line. Also, like I said, I got that tree back there. I can take and put it right there. And that's real fancy, right? That's pretty cool. So just different things to think about as you're moving around through the shot. And honestly, that tractor is so far back there, I didn't even see that. And this was an iPhone, not a fancy camera, right? So think about some stuff like that. And I think, let's see. Okay, you guys can come chill in the shade for 1 second. I'm going to talk about a couple things. I'm going to answer some questions, and then we'll get you guys out here doing this. So also, when these fighters are on their knees, like you saw, I got down here. Get yourself some knee pads like the fighters do. If you're hanging out with Numenor, get the hard shell plastic ones because they have walnuts on their field and I still have a bruise. You know. Yeah. Yeah. My knee is still messed up from like 3 weeks ago. Anyway, but yeah, put some knee pads under your fancy pants and I can be comfy down here all day, right? And there's a lot of good stuff down here. So like when Caleb was like earlier, I got that shot because I can get down low. Do some yoga stretches before if you're gonna take pictures at this level. Honestly, the way that I take photos is basically like I'm fighting with them. I don't recommend that for everybody because I've been doing this for a long time. But if that interests you, there's a lot of opportunity to be had there. Earlier this year, when I started shooting, I only had the camera that Adrius had. That lens doesn't zoom. I really can't do a lot.
There too, if anyone who's here is not normally on the field and you want to learn how to kind of read that ebb and flow of the field of like when a side is going to push, when a side is going to move, I'd be happy to work with you on that because that's part of heralding is being able to read the ebb and flow of the field, so I can help people learn that skill.
Like Thursday when it was raining and there was fighting in the pavilion, I felt comfortable shooting around all of those people as tight as that space was. And looking around, I was like, man, I think you might be like the only person that if I saw you out shooting in there, I would be like, yeah, I trust him to not hurt himself. He pays attention. I'm sure you all agree. I just don't know you. Because like I've been doing wedding photography for 12 years. And so when I got my camera here, I'm looking forward, but I'm also looking here because I got drunk groomsmen coming up around me, right? Like I got the couple having their first dance and then I know that this is, you know, the bride's parents and so I'm going to shoot around their shoulder, but I got to watch for Uncle Bob over here. So this is normal to me. Also, I've been shooting bands for years. But if you don't have practice with that, play on the safe side. We're really lucky that so far heralds have been very cool to all of us about letting us get pretty much as close as we want. Sometimes I'm like, man, I am waiting for the day for a herald to be like, you got to calm down. And it hasn't happened yet, but we all got to work together to keep that from happening. So if you see me being a dickhead too, tell me. One of my professors used to say that you zoom with your feet. As you saw, if they're moving around, I'm moving around a lot with them. That's how I get in there and get good shots. I'm not saying that that's the only way to shoot, but that is my personal preference. And I think that that can give you some really cool effects. There's lots of really great shots to be had on the sidelines, but with fighting specifically, we want to try to get to be where the action is. This also can be aided with good gear that can zoom really far. That's obviously pretty cost prohibitive, so if we want to talk about that later, we can. But for now, I'm going to try to keep it pretty accessible to everybody. So, does anybody have questions so far? I know that's a lot. ISO setting. So that's going to be super dependent on your on just your setting. Generally in broad sunlight, as low as possible. Generally as low as possible to prevent from degrading image quality. With that guy, like, are you meaning specifically for that camera?
No, in general,
okay.
I have the same problem with my camera.
Okay, yeah. Generally as low as possible, otherwise it's going to start degrading your image quality. But sometimes if it's like, well, it's this or I don't get the photo, make the decision to get the photo, you know? So that's where I'm at with that. But yeah, it's mostly just very situationally dependent. And I can explain some more stuff later. So let's get our fighter set up. Who all here wants to try to shoot fighting right now? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. Cool. Okay. How many fighters do I have? Okay, I got 8 here. All right, let's pair off in teams of 2. You all know each other and can decide who you want to fight. It's real fun and scrappy and fast. Like I said, Caleb's got that big reach and a natural lefty. So things to think about, things to pay attention to if you feel like it. Bug, I don't pay attention to you fighting a whole lot. Like, I get pictures and then I move on because I want to do other stuff. And I never square off against you.
I'm a rogue.
Okay, so Bug is a rogue with a flail. Do you want to fight Bug, Jareth? And like I said, Jareth's fast and scrappy. He's all over the place. I love it. And then eventually, if we want to talk about like some archer stuff, we can do that in a bit. But we're going to start with general fighting. So if you two want to go, if you want to take this big shady corner, go for it. If you take advantage of that stuff. So let's take 4 and 4. Pick which side you want to go on. Let's do 4 photographers to each group. Kind of start, opposing each other. You're going to get in the backgrounds of each other's photos for this, unfortunately. And try to work on that peripheral vision of not bumping into each other, please. But yeah. So, background, think about what your lighting is doing, thinking about where in the frame that you're putting people. If you have any questions, feel free and holler. If you have a really good question, I might stop everybody and go, oh, hey, I totally forgot to point that out. But otherwise, just kind of give each other some time. Feel free to ask me questions, and then I'll bring you all back.
Problem I'm running into. I'm getting completely drowned out.
Yeah, okay, let me see this guy real quick. So one thing, your f-stop's super duper low. Where is my f-stop on here? This scroll wheel. Like with the sun being as bright as it is, you're probably not going to want to go below the 4 or 5 unless you bump your shutter speed really intentionally.
Okay.
So I would try that, see if that gets you a little bit closer.
Much better.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right, so while the fighters reset, photographers, did you have any questions, any thoughts?
I like the lighting tips.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, once you start really learning to look for that, like the amount of times that I've just been sitting in my camp this week and I'm like, oh, guys, look at that. And it's just like the light on the clouds and they're like, yeah, Daguerre, that's normal. But once you start looking for it and you teach yourself to look for it, that's when it starts game changing for you. So, felt good. Felt like it was kind of making sense what to look for. Cool. All right, so other things that we can start thinking about is framing and foreground. So basically, when I said that we start from the background forward, we think about our background, we know what our fighters are doing. What can we put in front of them that might make this more interesting? So I don't know if you guys were at Carol's Knighting, but when we were doing the big group photo, Fancy said, hey, can you back up and get one with the fires in the foreground? And I was like, yeah, I got to make everybody move, but I can technically do that. You can start looking at your environment and thinking about what you want to play with. And this is where it really gets fun. So like I talked about the wedding, if you know that's the bride's parents on the dance floor and they're watching them lovingly, think about what that could look like in terms of story for fighting photos. So what kind of thing that also works with that is like we have Caled here and Bug. Caled is Bug's knight. They're in the Knight Squire process together. And so if they're fighting each other and I know that about them, I can decide what kind of story I want to tell. Y'all can keep hanging out. I'm not going to make you frame up anytime soon. I'm going to keep talking about stuff. But if they're squaring off, what kind of story do I want to tell? Do I want to do that shot out here? Do I want to shoot in a way that makes Bug look smaller than Caled or larger? Do I want to, if Caled takes a knee, well, that's a really interesting story now because they're the knight. So this is where your brain starts turning into a Rolodex, but this is like where it gets really fun too. So like recently I shot a knighting trial and the knight was the first female knight in a realm that had been together for since the 80s basically. And there was a little girl that was sitting in the front row watching. And I'm like, well, she's here. She's probably someone important to this night. And so I shot in a way where this little girl is watching this woman be knighted. And then behind her is Sir Jacanta the first female knight of Bellegarth, period. And you can think about those things as you're shooting and stack up those things to create really meaningful images. You just kind of got to start paying attention to what's around you, or you can go, nah, that's too much. I just want to fight an action on the field. That's cool too. There's two different ways of doing that. But if you keep even a little bit of that on the mind, as these two are on the field, you know, let's say Caleb comes in on the line with Numenor for the side of good during the fight earlier. Bug, ambitious baby frog, is going to obviously be with the monsters. They square up against the field with each other, and you know that this is going to be a dope time. Right? And I know sometimes this arm comes up here. Bug is a righty. So I'm going to framing Bug's face. If you come around here and look at what I'm talking about, down and get Hera's left arm over Bug's face, her stick here. They're playing a little bit because they're opposing them. Look at this head. Yeah, so we got one here that's working in this frame. We got all these diagonals. It's real fun to play with. Like I was talking about framing with all the lines of the swords. Here's arm up here. Another thing to start playing with is long weapons like this. So real quick, pretend you're a spear against Fleur, right? So if I'm looking down here, I have a kill line that's pointing right to Fleur. Shoot down the arm. Reasonable. I respect that. Even if it's a tournament and they're here, I can come in here and zoom in. Even if you're staying there, I got a person watching them. If you're someone who's interested in them, if you're just a general spectator, that just creates some visual interest. And the way the garb looks really cool when you add more layers, photos look really cool when you add more layers. If you guys want to get comfortable, I'm going to talk about a couple things before we get the fighters back out. I'm going to talk about archers. I'm going to talk about how to scale to line fights. And then possibly some other stuff. So let's talk about archers because they're kind of a special case, but those bows are so dang pretty. We want to shoot archers, right? Mueller, if you would like to come stand right here for me. And you don't need to actually put attention, kind of square like you're shooting. So if this is an archer, you've got a couple different options. Right here, obviously, we got this light coming in, putting all this fun highlight right here. That's something cool to look about. The shadows on them, their face is in shadow. Do we need to change our settings on our camera to compensate for that? Or are we shooting in RAW because we know how to edit RAW and we can fix that later? Sometimes, if you know, this is where you got to know the rules to break the rules. I'm real lazy at this point, guys. I'm going to be honest. we got this archer, right? And so right here, we got that grandma photo that I talked about. You know, we got this whole kit. We got now we can start thinking about garb too. We got the motion of the breeze and the leather. That's cool. Do we want that? Or do we want to shoot tight? Do we want to focus on their eyes? How comfortable can we get? Do we need to shoot it really wide and a big broad profile so they're more Olympian archer? Are we going to zoom in really tight, focus on that face in that hood, and they're a little rogue? You know?
Follow the arrow.
Exactly. So this is where we're going to talk. I'm going to put you on the spot. Fleur got this shot of Desi at Geddon, and I cannot stop thinking about it. So I'm going to talk about it specifically. So let's pretend that this is Desi. Fleur, I'm assuming, I don't know if Fleur did this. You can tell me if I'm entirely wrong and talking out of my butt. But you were probably across the field real far, and you were zoomed in real tight. I'm zoomed in down this arrow, and I have this much trajectory. Now, if I'm standing here, I have all this time that this arrow is going to stay in my frame. If I'm shooting horizontal, more frame. If I'm shooting straight, less frame. But if I get the dumber I want to be, the more it's going to stay with me, right? Whereas if I'm shooting over here and I'm shooting like this, boop, that arrow's gone. If you're a photographer that can position yourself to get an arrow and an archer shot, you will be their best friend forever. So If arm's doing that, and then they shoot this way, it's going to come straight down here, and he's going to have all that time to get it, right? So Fleur positioned himself down here, zoomed in real tight, because that arrow is about as big as Desi's head, right? So it's closer to me now. I know that. But he got it in the shot. And she's got these big metallic sunglasses on her green painted skin. And she shoots these arrows that have rainbow heads and neon fletchings. It's just all bright color. And he stacked it up perfectly. He had a bunch of tall grass in the background and some tents. It was pretty clean, and I can't stop thinking about it. That's a cool way to think about shooting archers. So, same real quick, if you're a spearman again, let's pretend like you're squaring up against me. If you can get near a spearman that you can shoot down this line is so stinking fun. Because let's say I'm real close to the edge of the world. There's a herald right here. There's cones. I feel pretty safe, right? But he's fighting this guy over my shoulder, and I have this whole line right here. This man looks like he's about to kill a man, because he is. And it's great. The longer lines you can play with and the more of them that you can stack in your image, it's just fun. So, that's that. Real quick, we'll talk about how to scale a line, and then I'll grab all my friends who want to fight and you can think about it. So, in the same way that when you're shooting, you want to kind of think about this as people's MySpace photos, I still do that on the line. I walk up to a line, and let's say we'll do it with like 3v3 if we have enough. Same thing. We got our line. They're going to square off. Okay. Right now, I'm usually going to start shooting someone like Maze. Maze has this barn in the background, all these fence posts, all these trees, not too bad of a background. He's got bug here, so if bug's up here, there's going to be something at the top. I can shoot Maze's face under. If bug's low, I can try to shoot over that. Now, all of this, I'm going to say this, but is that a lot of luck and timing? It is a lot of luck and timing, but I know where to look for. I know to drop. I know to stand up, that sort of stuff, right? So Maze is probably a good spot to start with. He's got this light coming in, hitting him here. That's fun. And then, so then think about that on the line. Pick a person on the line that seems interesting to you. Get them that MySpace photo. Square up again real quick. I'm going to see if there's anything interesting I want to point out. Okay, so right here, this sun came out. And this is a pretty cool shot. We got all that pretty stuff on back there. Now, Moeller has their cheek over their shield. They've got this metallic copper paint on, and this harsh sunlight hitting it. That shit is popping. And over this black shield, right? They got the dark hair. That's a cool shot. I got this knight here that I know is lefty. She's probably gonna throw up this way, so I can shoot here. I can come around here. If bug is taking a while to swing, I can shoot through here. I can keep going around this whole thing. This is where moving and paying attention and rotating with you goes in. I got Kaled over Maze's shoulder. I got Maze's thing here and the unit he's from. If I want to shoot him low and tight, that's gonna show off all his shit. That's real fucking cool. Down here on the ground, these are these knights. Shit. Okay, is the squire gonna come back from here? Do you guys feel like doing just a little 2-on-2 and letting these guys work around you? Okay, spread out a little bit, zoom in a little bit more. Does anybody have any questions before we do that? I don't know how long they stayed together as a group, so I'm sorry if that wasn't a good example of scaling for the field, but it really does scale if that approach works for you. If you find that you're like, that doesn't make sense, then don't do it. Like ultimately, it's like I said, I do weddings, and when people are like, I love photography, I would never do weddings. I'm like, I respect that decision. Like, it takes a special kind of crazy to be willing to do that. Yeah, so when it comes to choosing to do stuff, like if getting up close doesn't work for you, don't do it. Ultimately, this is a fighting sport, so fighting comes first, photos come second. Obviously be real respectful of the heralds, because like I said, they've been real cool to us so far. But like with working in like music festival media, there were a lot of photographers that would exploit some of those comfortability loopholes. And it was always so frustrating for the people that I knew really cared and tried. So yeah, respect our heralds. Let's be cool. Not that I expect anything less of you guys, but you know. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's as active as you want it to be. And there's just a lot of stuff to look at that can really enrich your photos. Does anybody have any additional questions? Yeah. Even if it comes to more specific stuff, like I've tried to keep it broad, but if you have more specific questions, I can answer those. Y'all seem like you have like big boy cameras and not cell phones, which everything's cool. I just wasn't sure what people were going to show up with. Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Oh gosh. One tail end thing to think about. Are most of you guys shooting on manual or auto settings?
I usually shoot
Your
auto.
manual, auto, manual.
Auto.
Okay, cool. If you get to the point that you want to start moving into more manual settings, all of you seem to have cameras that have that S and that A and that P. Those allow you to pick one of the settings of shutter, aperture, and well, the S is shutter, the A is aperture, but then you can pick that setting and go, okay, I'm really going to focus on learning this skill. What does this mean? And if you're still intimidated by that, you can even put your ISO on auto. And so it's basically 60% auto still. And it's kind of training wheels that are built into your camera that we get these cameras and we go, I don't know what any of this other stuff does. So if you're interested in that, I can tell you more about that later. If you're in manual and you're in a setting where the lighting is ideal or it's a little bit more dusk, start playing around with shutter speed as well. Do you want a really fast shutter speed so that motion is frozen, the absolute horror on their face? Do you want a blur so like the body is frozen but the arm is just in motion and the fancy garb behind them is a blow-in? Start playing with those things, and the more that you play with those settings, the better you're going to get, and then you can be absolutely in control of what you want your images to look like. So yeah, that's basically everything I have. If you have any other questions, feel free to holler. Otherwise, I got to get stuff to Anna soon. But thanks for coming, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you.